McLaughlin.
Yeah.
Okay, so a quick intro of myself. I'm Helen McLaughlin. I'm currently an information security architect at Workday, which is a Saas provider for HCM and financial management software. I've got over 15 years experience in IT, so I've worked on a number of different types of projects, so software development and integration, as well as managing a sort of global business application support team. And I guess, I wanted to come and share some of the insights that I've had from my work experience, really. The first thing is talking about the trends. So I think this is, everybody knows this. The consensus is that SaaS adoption is accelerating. It's here to stay. You've got various different market research bodies. So you've got Gartner, Forrester. You've got people who are investing in technology. So you've got the investment banks, Goldman Sachs, and so on, as well as solution integrators that do all of their market research, trying to predict the future. And really, what they all come up with is that cloud adoption is accelerating. SaaS is going to be outstripping the growth of infrastructure as a service and platforms as a service. And the most important focus is going to be around security in the cloud as well as the mobile applications. So KPMG do a report every year where they're looking at enabling business in the cloud, and they're looking at the different concerns from the IT execs that are responding. And what has become most important more recently is the issue of data loss and privacy risks, as well as the risk of intellectual property theft. This more so than looking at how your IT organization is going to be impacted, the return on investment, the features, functionality, and so on. And it's very real. The other trend is that there's a greater awareness amongst executives about security risks because they're now in the newspapers. I mean, these, there's a few examples here. You have Heartbleed, which was a vulnerability in the protocol, the TLS protocol, which I think most companies heard about because that was in the papers back in April last year. And then Sony, another, which was actually, they think it's an insider threat where somebody has, gone after content in order to embarrass and, damage the reputation and obviously share price of Sony. You've also got things that are, the brute force attacks on the iCloud, so the posting of private pictures and so on, which I think everybody's aware of. And then the other, another example would be a malware attack where we had the largest credit card theft actually in history. It was 70 million credit card details were taken. Malware was installed on servers inside Target. They had around 1,800 points of sale, shops, points of service, and they were routing all of those credit card details somewhere in Eastern Europe. Now, 70 million, that's 1 in 3. 1 in 3 of the American population was actually impacted by such an event. And these are now in the newspapers, so whether it's in the US or over in Europe, people are now aware. And nobody actually, nobody wants their company name put next to, an event like this. So when you're looking to move to the cloud, assuming that's the trend, what is it that people are looking for? They're looking to ensure that, security is a priority, as well as data privacy being a priority, which, makes perfect sense. So is it valid that you've got these concerns? And I'd say, with the new paradigm that we have with, moving to the cloud, the thing I would also say is that we've always, for the last couple of decades, we've been outsourcing business processes. So it's not new. If you think payroll, we've been outsourcing payroll for, 20 years, recruitment as well. It's rare that the HR functions actually are doing, a lot of their own recruitment and managing that process like background screening, looking at education background, employment history, criminal background checks, and so on. That's a lot of that process is now outsourced, as well as accounting. So the putting together of your financial reports and so on is often done by an external company, as well as IT support. So most of us are calling and dealing with third parties, whichever one of the major players it is. When you're calling about your issues with your help desk, they're often external employees, outsourced, and call centers, of course. Whether you're dealing with your bank, often you're routed to the Philippines or to India or somewhere where they're providing services around the clock. So it's not new, it's not unique. And I guess the thing here is that, when executives see, talk of the cloud and putting their data in the cloud, they're actually doing that already. They're already putting their data with another party when they're outsourcing their business processes. So it's not new. It's more, it's a fear that we need to overcome. And the other one is sort of international transfers of data. So there are also concerns about where your cloud provider may be based and where your data may be hosted. And this seems to come up a lot because there are questions about who can access what from where. And again, this actually is not a new problem. If you think about it, actually email is probably the biggest or the least secure application and method of transferring data that we've got. You have very little control over what is attached in there, the content, the data, the Excel files, with everybody's salary details, whatever it is. So we've been transferring data across borders already when we're dealing with suppliers, with affiliates, with other offices as part of our company. And the reason why is because data is needed in those places. So it's a requirement, it's needed, it's necessary, and we do it today. So moving to the cloud isn't going to affect that. So it's not, it's not a new consideration. So what should we be doing? We should be looking towards assurance. How are you going to get assurance when you're working with cloud service providers and specifically software as a service? Now this is an interesting one. So first of all, regulatory compliance. And I think the first thing when you're looking to outsource different types of business applications, the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to look at, what is your industry and what are the regulations for your industry? What is your core business? Are these things that you want to outsource, or can you regulatory and legally do that? So if you're a defense contractor, so your Rolls-Royce or BAE Systems, would you really want to be outsourcing systems that are hosting your, confidential information that is about the secrets of all of the designs of whatever it is that you're manufacturing? Probably not. If you're a financial services company, would you be outsourcing your, the transaction systems and the credit and market risk systems? Probably not. Asset and liability management and so on. All of the things are core banking activities. You would not be looking to outsource those. And from a regulatory perspective as well, that would be really difficult. The same with pharmaceuticals. If you're developing drugs, there are certain regulations and rules about, the controls that need to be in place for that. So it's important to understand what the regulatory environment is for your particular company and make decisions on what is appropriate to be actually outsourced. It's clear, I think, Office is usually, office infrastructure. When I say office, I mean your email, your file services, your SharePoint, whatever it is that's sort of supporting your office activities. Those are usually the first to be outsourced, and you see a large uptake, I think, of Microsoft Office 365 by Microsoft, which is software as a service. And actually, in in the last year that I've worked at Workday, we see that actually Office 365 is one of the first cloud service providers that companies have gone with. So they've already started to cut new ground with how to deal with that within their companies. The other thing as well, so going back to the transfer of data across borders, the other thing to account for and understand is what are the privacy regulations that are relevant to you. If you talk in terms of the data protection regulation in Europe, which is quite strong, you have a couple of entities. You've got a data controller and a data processor. Your data controller is the customer in this scenario. So it's you, and when you are the data owner, the data controller, you're responsible to make sure that you are meeting the obligations of regulation. You're responsible for compliance. When you move towards a SaaS provider, you do not outsource that responsibility. You do not transfer the risk, and responsibility to another party. You're still the one who's accountable and responsible for regulation. So it's important to know, and you'll see this reflected in the contracts as well with SaaS providers. So it's important to understand, what is it that where are my jurisdictions that I'm doing business? What are the privacy requirements and in those locations? Who can access what data from where? Who can view what? Who can action what on what data? And this is, it's not only in choosing a provider that can actually allow you to restrict access between different locations, for example, but also make sure that the contract is represented adequately, as well as during deployment, you need to make sure that this is done well. So it's important to consult the different functions within your organization, your compliance and your legal counsel, when you are selecting a vendor, to make sure that they can provide a service that will allow you to meet your regulatory requirements, and also in contract negotiations as well as solution design. What I've seen in experience is that a lot of technology departments go ahead with decision making for a certain SaaS provider and actually forget this part. And they come in much later in the process, which can actually delay everything. If you're sort of project-oriented and looking towards a delivery date by a certain time, you can actually get unstuck if you don't involve these people early in the process. So you need to make sure that what you're transitioning towards with whichever business service that you're outsourcing, you need to make sure that it's compliant. And then the other thing as well is the regulatory environment obviously changes. It doesn't change quickly. To put new laws in place takes several years of rounds of discussion and negotiation. If we look at I think data protection regulation in Europe is due to be overhauled, and we're expecting the European Commission to announce that shortly this year, in fact this month. And then they're going to have a couple of years to comply with it. But it's important, whether it's a privacy or whether it's a compliance for your particular industry, you need to keep abreast of what those changes are and how to evolve and continuously ensure that you can still be compliant. So it's new mechanisms that need to be put in place, essentially. Another aspect as well, so when you're looking at a provider, it's great to take their word that everything that they do is done well, but really you should trust them, of course, but also verify. And there's a number of ways that you can do that. Any SaaS provider that is doing business and well and successfully, they should have a host of different third-party audit reports that you can actually review. I think most people will be familiar with some of the content of these, but I'll just run through them. So the first would be the ISO 27001, which is it's about your information security management system, and it's got everything from compliance and legal about how you recruit, look at backgrounds, background screening and checking of qualifications and employment history, credit checks, whatever might be relevant. It also goes through software development and the controls around that, all the way through to business continuity planning, disaster recovery, monitoring, etc. There's about 13 different categories. What's important to know as well with your ISO, you have actually a statement of applicability. So it could be that a provider decides what they think are the relevant controls that they should be meeting. You need to look carefully at what the design of those controls is. So do they cover all of the aspects that are important and should be in there? And that's something that should take place as part of a negotiation before you sign any contracts. The next one is so you've got the SSAE 16 SOC 1 and SOC 2 reports. These replaced the SAS 70 back in, I think it was June 2011. And we've also got the international standard, the 3042 audit, which is actually the same as the SOC 1, more or less. And these are, so you've got the SOC 1, which is around your financial, controls around, for your financial reporting. So it would be the equivalent of your SOX 404. And then your SOC 2 is about your information security controls for a service organization. So looking at the content of these reports, and having gone through a few of these, they can be, they can be a couple of, or a few hundred pages long. So it's pretty dry content, maybe good material for just before bed. But it's important to look at the content of these and make sure that they're complete. You get your SOCs every 6 months, and you get your your SOC 1 every 6 months, and your SOC 2 every 12 months. So it's important as well that you not only have the first view of these before you work with a provider, but you also then have some mechanism to have somebody to continuously review these. Deltas, for example, between the different reports of different years. Check what is new, check what has evolved, see how they've changed their service and the controls. The next one was about the safe harbor. So this is about the adequacy of controls around personal data. So with the data protection regulation, they talk about personally identifiable information or information that can identify a natural living person. And in Europe and the European Economic Area and Switzerland, we have quite stringent controls. And if you're going to be outsourcing with a company that has got support functions in other countries, you need to be aware of which countries those are and make sure that there's some sort of adequacy agreement. So Safe Harbor is the one that the US government have. It's a program they set up to ensure that they have an adequate level of controls, and any provider should have a registration with the Chamber of Commerce for this. And then there's reciprocal agreements with other countries as well. So these are things to look for to make sure that you know who's going to be accessing your data from where, and have they got adequacy in terms of privacy protection. And then Trust eCloud Privacy Certification is another example of certifications that you can look at which demonstrate high standards. Another way of comparing, so it depends, so benchmarking of the different SaaS providers. So you may have a number of different providers that you're looking at. And depending on how mature your own risk assessment process is, you may want to look towards things like the BIT Shared Assessment, Shared Information Gathering Questionnaire, or the Cloud Security Alliance CSA STAR self-assessment. What these are well, the two different bodies here independently, they have got together and agreed on what a baseline set of controls should be in order to allow you to compare cloud providers. And this is, this is a good one because it could be a way of actually checking whether your risk assessment process is comprehensive by comparing your own to this, or even taking this as your lead and getting any providers to complete these so that you can actually compare like with like. Now, SaaS providers, there's a few differentiators. So the benefits of obviously going with a SaaS provider over doing it in-house, one of the key things would be a dedicated security organization and governance. It's core business to a SaaS provider. If you're not keeping the data secure, you don't have a business essentially. So they actually invest heavily. So you could, what you'd be looking for is to make sure that a SaaS provider has a comprehensive organization that is supporting not only guidelines on design and development and testing and promotion to production of all of your code, as well as an effectively managed security operating center. And you'd want to understand about their incident handling processes. How does that work? What is the notification if there's any breach or if there's a security incident that could affect you? They're going to be doing it well. They're going to be doing it following best practice. And they're going to be doing it sort of, at a high standard. So it's worth, investing the time to really dig into the details of what it is and how they're actually managing their organization. There's another aspect as well. So a lot of the SaaS providers tend to be newer players on the market or a new part of an existing sort of older incumbent. And what you'll find is that they are usually, because they maybe don't have legacy, they have not come from a history of perhaps being, relational databases. They're using more modern technologies that are built for cloud. So if you look at LinkedIn, if you look at Google or Facebook as examples, they're using object-oriented design in their databases, and it's built for cloud. You then get additional features which you cannot get with relational databases without a lot more overhead in processing or cost for storage. So things like always-on auditing. These are key features that you would want when you're outsourcing as well, because you want to make sure that you know who has accessed or viewed anything at any one time, whether it's on the infra layer, application layer, and so on. As well, the other aspect is encryption. So encryption of all of your data at rest, all of your data in transit. Going back to this example of relational databases, it's very difficult to encrypt all of your information in your database on the fly without having a massive performance overhead. And I think with the newer technologies in the SaaS marketplace, they can really encrypt on the fly because of how they've deployed their object-oriented data model. And the other aspect as well, you're going to find that usually these are highly customizable, highly configurable rather than customizable. So if you've got on-premise software and you are, making your changes, usually it's a large development project and integration project to bolt on any changes or additions that you want to put on there. And it's actually, you should be looking for something that is configurable, highly configurable, that allows you to, more strictly apply whatever your policies are for things like user access control. Another thing as well, if you're looking for a SaaS provider, they often have built, true SaaS is multi-tenanted, and it's built off a single code line. When you have that, you have a single security model. You may have some providers that actually call themselves SaaS, but what they are is a number of acquisitions where they have put together a portal with then several databases and modules, if you like, sat behind it. So you're going to have a different security model applied to each of those, rather than in true SaaS where you have a single code line and a single security model. You've actually only got one place to apply all of your security, which is key. The next one as well then is the and stricter access control for support functions. So again, going back to who can access your data from where, you want to make sure that you don't have data breaches. And they're going to have this more tightly tied down. Again, going back to the our current on-premise environments, you often have a sysadmin or a DBA who can log directly onto any box, and they can usually read everything in clear text of what is on there in the database. With the newer technologies where you've been able to encrypt everything that is in your persistent store, you can have all of your infra support functions log on, but they actually can't read it because it's all encrypted. So these are key. The next one as well is obviously if you've got application support, making sure that everything is logged. And you should have the facility to be able to integrate all of their application logging from the cloud provider with your own security information and event monitoring solution. So these are key things that you should be looking for. So the changing focus of IT. So if I look at the way that things seem to be evolving from what I can see, it's less about the control over physical assets. I think there's an initial concern or fear with taking your applications and putting them in the cloud, not being able to look at them physically in a data center. I think if you tie it back to the slides about, where we saw Sony and the iCloud and the Target incidents, these were not attacks that had happened because people had accessed the physical kit. It's not about physical access to your server environments that are hosting your applications. It's actually more important about the logical access and how you control and limit who has logical access to your information and your data. So, with this in mind, once we get over that, let's say, fear or concern of moving to the cloud, what we then have is a new way of looking at technology, which is actually about the framework of attestations and assurance from audit to make sure that you have got end-to-end compliance across your entire technology stack or business process. So what this means, if you've got all of these, you've essentially got to come up with your new governance framework of how that's going to work within your company. And what this means is you possibly need to look at the way that your policies are currently defined. So do you have a policy for how you assess a cloud provider in the first place? Do you have a policy of how you should be, what are the standards that you should be assessing them, doing the risk assessment? How do you make sure, the ongoing monitoring and maintenance? Which roles are going to be doing that? So the roles and responsibilities as well of the different IT functions is going to evolve. And I think, it's clear today. And I think, I see it when we're doing the contract negotiations with new customers, the fact that it's a new paradigm and a new way of working. Not only that, I think with a SaaS provider, you previously, when you were buying software, it would be a contract with a vendor, and you'd be able to define all of your own terms and conditions. Whereas in the new paradigm, it's often as well a one-to-many model. So you have a single set of contract terms it's not possible to incorporate your own security controls or objectives or terms and conditions into those SaaS contracts because it breaks the one-to-many model. And for that reason, then you are really, it's a subscriber model rather than a contract that is with a vendor where you can have whatever you like in it. And that actually means that you, per SaaS provider, you have to adapt your roles and your roles in order to basically fulfill whatever output of information is coming and keep it all in order to make sure that you're compliant so that you can report back to your auditors. I think I'm going a bit quicker than I intended. But the key takeaways then are SaaS is here to stay. I don't think anybody disagrees with that statement. It's growing, it's going to grow. There's a lot of benefits around doing it. And nobody wants to have a data breach. That's the most important thing. Nobody, no executive of any sort wants to make a decision and have their company name tied to the fact that there was a breach with whichever cloud service provider that they've gone with. Getting over the fear of actually outsourcing once again. So the challenges aren't new. We've been doing this for decades actually, with all the different business processes that we've outsourced. And understanding the requirements, what would you not outsource? What would you outsource? And making sure that you're meeting all of your regulatory compliance as well as business objectives. And then your governance and monitoring framework needs to be looked at. As well as incorporating whatever output the SaaS provider has, so all of the different reports that we were talking about that come with a regular frequency, whether it's half a year or every year, you need to make sure that your governance and monitoring framework is incorporating those. Not only that, making sure that you're getting the feeds from compliance and legal for anything that might be changing and how you need to adapt your solution, the changes in the controls from the SaaS provider, making sure that you're continuously doing a risk assessment to make sure that it's still meeting your requirements. And again, reviewing your policies and your roles and your responsibilities because they are going to change. You're going to be managing the negotiation of contracts as well as engaging the different roles such as your information security, your risk assessment folks, compliance, legal, procurement as well need to change the way that they think when you're dealing with these different one-to-many contracts. So that was what I wanted to talk to you about. And I want to invite questions if anybody has any. Not necessarily. I think sorry. So I think to summarize the question, I think you've got a larger attack surface when you've got multiple SaaS providers. Yeah, and opposite to doing like on-premise. Right, so the perception is that if you've got on-premise, you've got better control and security over something that is, let's say, multiple SaaS providers that you've integrated as your solution. Yeah. Now, let me think. So what would the most important thing here is, you're equating on-premise as in physically having it in your own environment as being more secure than being in the cloud, which I don't think is necessarily... Let's say it's still on the same level, but it's like one environment. So it's sheer numbers. So if you get more to the same level, we're comfortable with. So let's say we do assurance on the best provider, and usually we measure our organization, so if it's on the same level or better, there's no increased risk in ourselves. But using numbers, you get an increased attack service. Yeah, I guess you do. You do have an increased attack service when you've got more SaaS providers. But then again, in fact, you'd probably want information about the volumes of security incidents that they may have, but I don't believe any SaaS organization would actually share that with you. So it's really difficult to get that sort of insight. I think the key question is how many data breaches have they had in a period of time? That, I think, is the most important one, because that's actually what you're interested in, is protecting your data. And really, then I would go back to the contracts and make sure that during breach, if there was a breach, what are the provisions in the contract for that? So you're going to have liability insurance of sorts, and sort of, how to rectify that situation, whether it's setting up an organization in order to contact all the people whose data has been breached, maybe even if it's identity theft or... I think SaaS, you should expect a higher level of service from a SaaS provider, absolutely, without a doubt. And I think during your assessment, you would hope to find that that is actually the case. And as well, it's a risk-based assessment, isn't it? I mean, you're not going to be putting your core business assets out to those providers. You're only going to be, you're going to look at the classification of your data. So the lowest classification perhaps is where you start, which often is HR or financial type data.
Actually, I see two big issues about in general cloud, specifically SaaS. First is reliability. I trust in my cloud service, but actually it's not well defined yet in real world how responsible is the provider, and that's very tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. And second, if I need to prove something, cloud forensics is a mess right now. So actually, that's why I don't trust yet cloud services.
So there's two parts to that. One is about the liability question,
Yes,
and
forensics, then will you actually
and
prove something?
is forensics any good? And again, this should all be part of your contract negotiation. So I think with the liability question, so if you take data privacy as an example, so if you've got your own employees' data that you're outsourcing, and it's HR as an example, you as the data controller have informed that data subject of why you're collecting the data and how you're going to process it and for what purpose and so on. So all of the 7 principles. Yeah, so I'm using Europe as an example. So if there is a, so if you're outsourcing to a cloud service provider, you actually, as the data owner, you don't remove the responsibility. So you're still accountable. So if there is a breach, for example, you could be charged, well, in fact, with the new regulations that are coming, they're talking about making percentage charges of your annual turnover. So there's risk, there's definitely risk. But I'll say this, today you would have insurance within your company, liability insurance, and actually, if you were doing work on-premise or in the cloud, you would have exactly the same insurance. So it doesn't change. The only thing that changes is that somebody else is managing it and you're verifying those controls around the data. So yeah, your liability is there today. Your liability with a SaaS provider would still be there tomorrow. Your insurance terms may change a little bit, but it's still exactly the same principle. And then the question about trust. So, I mean, you should be asking questions like, what do you do with your log files? Are they in a central server? How do you avoid tampering? All of the usual sorts of things, segregation of duties, having to make changes to log files in multiple locations, in order to cover your tracks, which is obviously going to be difficult, keeping your logs for, an extended period of time, 18 months or more, this sort of thing. As well as making sure that there is, in fact, you should have in the event of a breach, you should have a minimum level of requirements of what sort of output you want from the cloud service provider. So what is the breach? What is the scale of it? What is the scope of it? A time frame on understanding what the issue is, so they're dedicating resources to it, to making sure that they can then inform you what they think it is and what they're going to do to remediate. So those sorts of things. It's not, I don't think you can necessarily prevent totally, things happening, but making sure then that you've got the appropriate things afterwards to deal with it, to give you a level of trust. And that's doing the thinking in advance for the contract, I think. Shall I?
How about the regulation that SaaS provider has to announce breaches like in the mutuation industry, when you
And again, so you've got the same, so if you take, I think, the new data, I can't remember whether the new regulation is saying within a, an acceptable short time frame, but it doesn't actually define. But you might want to ensure, again, contractually, that if there is a data breach that is known of, that you need notification within a 48-hour period. In fact, no, I think it's 72 hours for certain regulations? I know, having done some contracts in this country, that there was with the Dutch National Bank, there was a requirement to report any data breach within 72 hours. And so I think written into the contracts, you'd want something from your provider that would be less. So I think, again, it's about understanding what your requirements are and then making sure that you can incorporate that into your contracts. And I think depending on, in fact, if a cloud provider has done their job well from a compliance and legal perspective, they should have made sure that the generic design of their contracts is fit for most purposes. So it should, if they haven't specified the amount of time to notify you of a breach, they should have a time that they could put in if they were able to, because their process supports it.
Have you ever seen a service provider who offers on the services different assurance?
Have I seen a service provider that gives different assurance levels?
How to rely on that?
So this, I would say, and actually this is an interesting nuance, because if it's a true SaaS provider and it's a single code base and it's a multi-tenanted solution, it shouldn't really be feasible to give different levels of assurance because it's all one. Now, you may find other providers that will say, we can give you general terms and conditions, specific terms and conditions, and if you hear that, you must know that there's something not right, and then dig a little bit further, because it's probably, they're selling it as a multi-tenanted, and it actually isn't. Yeah. Yeah. That's, I'm not familiar with that. But what I would say, so if you're saying discrediting of some of the bodies where we look for assurance, which I guess you could say the same with, auditors, Anderson Consulting, or, we get these events periodically, whether it's, financial accounting or whether it's, something like the trust. But then you need to evolve your model and evolve what you're looking for. But I think the industry is still quite new and it is evolving. And I think we will see new things coming. So, I mean, if you take Saas 70, they decided it was not fit for purpose because it was trying to be too many things to too many people. And then they split it off into the SOC 1 and the SOC 2, one for the financial reporting and one for the security controls. So I guess it's going to be an evolving landscape. It's going to continuously be evolving, which I guess is the cool thing about IT, really. It's always evolving. Cool. Thank you for listening.